Hello, my name is Keith Wyatt, and I'd like to welcome you to the continuation of acoustic blues. In our first video, we talked about the basics of playing blues on the acoustic guitar, the open position chords, playing bass lines, playing embellishments around the chords. And in this video, we're going to concentrate more on playing the melodies, getting up on top of the chords, playing solos, and also talk a little bit about finger picking, which is an indispensable technique in acoustic blues guitar. I'm going to take you through a lot of different techniques and ideas that you may not have played before, but the magic of video is that you can always stop the tape, rewind, and listen as often as you like. All right, let's get right down to it. Here's the B string. The G string, now here's D, the A string, and the low E. A lot of the great solos that you hear on acoustic blues guitar are really not as different from the chord parts as you might imagine. When we learned chords and we learned how to embellish chords, what we were really doing is creating melodies using notes that belong to the chord as well as notes that are built around the chord. In other words, scale tones, right? Now, rather than learn scale patterns up and down the neck, as is the custom when learning electric guitar, we're going to concentrate on the chords themselves and mainly in the open position, because that's where the real nature of acoustic comes out to the fullest. All right? Now, what I just played there, for instance, was an example of what I think of as playing melodies around the chord shapes. We did a little bit of this, and now we're going to take that idea and expand on it. Now, in the first video as well, I talked a little bit about right-hand technique and about some of the options that people have. You can use just bare thumb and fingers. You can use a flat pick, a thumb pick. Those are all different ways of getting the sound out of the instrument. And as I said in the first video, I prefer the flat pick because it's more versatile for me. And I'll show you some techniques for using the flat pick that really help you get the most out of it. So if I play an example using the pick and you want to use your fingers, that's quite all right. The sound is going to be a little different, but the techniques are essentially the same. All right? Now, let's say we want to get a melody, play a little solo, that is, around an E chord. What are the different options? Rather than looking at a scale pattern right off the bat, let's look at the notes of the chord and see what we can get out of it without really changing much. For instance, right there, that's a real traditional phrase built around the notes of the E dominant 7th chord. Now, to review, E dominant 7th in a typical voicing is played like that. Now, when you look at the notes of the chord, you're seeing notes that could be reconfigured, played in a different order to make a melody. Right? If I simply play the notes out of order, it already starts to sound a little bit more melodic, and all I need to do is add a couple of little phrasing ideas, and I can really make it happen. Now, what I did when I played that lick was this right here. Really common technique. And this is all done with the flat pick, although, as I said, you can use your thumb. But there's no finger picking involved here. Now, here's how it goes. I'm starting with the open low E, playing the E on the 4th string. Since I'm not literally playing the chord, I'm going to refinger it. Rather than using my 3rd finger as I normally would, I'll use my 2nd. And then here's the heart of it right here. There's that little hammer-on. Now what I'm doing there is I'm picking the open G string, and then I'm clamping my index finger down at the first fret without picking again. Then I pick the high string. Right. Get that sound? And then the last note is another note that belongs directly to the chord, the 7th, right there, right? And then I can end it up with a high E again. Now because I'm using the open E chord and playing in open position, I can let that bass note ring, and that provides the background for my solo. So even if I'm playing by myself, I can still hear the chord while I'm playing the melody. Right? The sound of the chord rings together, and by the time I play all those notes, it's as if I played the chord itself. Right? That's the idea. And from there on, it's a lot of experimentation, just fooling around with different possibilities. If I want to put it together in a 12-bar blues, for instance, key of E, I could play something like this. There's the A chord, right? I did the same idea. Now remember when we played the A chord in the first part, we played that little embellishment there with the 4th finger playing while the chord is being held down. In this case, because I'm playing more of a melody and not worrying so much about the chord, I'm refingering it again for individual notes. Makes the notes ring out more clearly. Here's the open A string. 3rd finger is playing the G, then the F sharp. Now I pull it off. This is the opposite of a hammer-on. In other words, I pluck the note at the 2nd fret, pull my finger to the side without picking again, and then playing 2nd fret on the 2nd string. So I get. Right? And again, by the time I get done playing the lick, you can really hear the sound of the A7 chord. It's been assembled one note at a time rather than being played as a complete shape. Right? Now one word about right hand technique. I said I'm flat picking. You can play it with your thumb and fingers or a thumb pick if you like. The direction of the pick is not so important. In other words, let it be a natural thing. I'm using some downstrokes and some upstrokes. But nothing I'm going to play in this video is going to be so fast that you have to really work on your right hand. It's just getting it to be smooth and relaxed. In that particular instance, I'm using a combination of downstrokes and upstrokes, and many blues players will play almost all downstrokes except for the occasional upstroke just when it fits. All right? And that's all I'm going to say about the right hand in this particular instance, because we're going to get to it much more detail when we talk about finger picking. All right? So I've got a lick on E, a lick on A. I can come back to the E again. The progression returns to E. There's a continuation of the first lick. Now check this out. Then with the hammer-on. And then I'm going to move the note down like that, like I did when I was embellishing the chord. Remember that, right? So now I've got. Okay. So right now we've got 2 licks on the E chord, 1 on the A chord. Let's put them together in a 12 bar and see what we got. All right, here we go. From the top, key of E. Play along with me. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's A again. E. Now what do you do on the B chord? That's the next thing coming up. That's what a lot of blues players do right there. Now did you see my left hand fingers move? No, because I held the chord shape down and just used my right hand to create a little rhythmic melody. right? That's all there is to it. Back to A. And I'm back to E again, and I can play my turnaround lick. Remember this from the first part? So now putting those couple of licks together on the E and the A chord together with just the rhythmic picking of the B chord, we have a complete 12-bar solo. I'll play it for you, with you, one more time. Okay, you play along with me. I'm going to show you another trick right after that that's going to put the whole thing together and make it sound really complete. All right, here we go. From the top. 2, 3, 4, 1. One, back to E, B, A, E. Now, even though it sounds pretty complete in that we can hear the chords while we're playing the melody, there's a lot of empty space in there. Another technique that I talked about in the first part was playing bass lines, and now we can use that technique to fill up those gaps and make this sound like a complete piece of music from start to finish. It's going to go like this. All right? Check it out, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. Now, it sounds like there's two different things going on, and in fact there are, but since they don't happen at the same time, you can keep them straight. All right, now let's break that down and really look at it in detail. It starts off with the lick that I showed you initially on the E chord. Now, instead of just hanging out and waiting for the A chord to happen, I'm going to play a bass run that takes me from E to A. It goes like this. So 3rd fret, 4th fret, I can use the same finger, it doesn't matter, and then the open string. Now what finger to use on the bass note is just any finger that you can get to. All right, I'm using my 3rd finger because it's not being used at that instant in the chord. All right, then I play my A lick. I can play the same lick off of the A bass note and then return to the E. Right, so now, putting them together, I've got right, hear how smooth that sounds all of a sudden? And yet, it's very simple parts. The hardest thing about it is learning the individual pieces and being able to play them in tempo. So what you need to do is learn each lick and then play it really slow and gradually work your way up until you can play along with me, all right? Now, continuing with the same idea, we've got the E, the A, and now we're going to play the E again. Now there I just use a couple of open strings and the bass run to help fill in the gap between the E and the A chord. Same idea there. I just use a couple of open strings, fills up that space, then I walk up into the B chord, back down to the A chord, and I'm ready for my turnaround. That's pretty hip. Let's play it together one time again, slow tempo, and go for continuity, all right? You're going to hear how all the ideas fit together, and then you can work on it on your own. Okay, here we go from the top. 2, 3, 4. Pretty hip, isn't it? Now, you can do more with that kind of an idea, just experimenting on your own. The idea is hold the chord down and find out how many notes are around the chord that you can play without letting go of the chord. Okay, check this out. There's the upper part of my E chord. Now I'm fingering it this way so that I have 2 fingers free. That's going to make my melody playing a little bit easier. That sounds pretty bluesy right there. What am I doing? I'm bending the 1st string from the 3rd fret just a little bit. That's a blues trademark right there. All right. I've also got on the 2nd string, on the 3rd string. So right there I've got that's a lot of melody based around one particular chord shape. Now on the A chord you can use the same idea. We already worked on that one right there. Now remember there was another voicing of A that we used. This is with the 1st finger and 2nd finger. Easy to play, and it leaves the 3rd and 4th fingers free to play melody notes. Now where are they going to be in this case? We already know about that one. Crossing over to the 2nd string, there's one, 3rd string, that's pretty bluesy. Yeah, that's definitely bluesy right there. So I'm going 4th finger, 2nd finger, 4th. That's a blue note. That's the flat 5. 2nd finger, minor 3rd, and down to the root. Now that in itself is in fact a legitimate scale. That's called the blues scale. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later on when we talk about finger picking, because that's a very popular scale and a popular shape. But right now you can do it with a flat pick. Again, on the B chord, most people will just play the chord as it is and add a little rhythm with the right hand. And that's pretty much it. So you've really got a way to improvise in the key of E without really thinking about scales, scale patterns, or any different techniques. It's sort of what you might call an organic way of playing. And players have used this since the beginning, since the guitar started out as an accompanying instrument and sort of grew into its lead role. Now that's another way of playing solo guitar with a hint of melody and a lot of rhythm and using things that we've already learned how to do. In the introductory video for this series, I talked about a certain turnaround in the key of E that went like this. And when I just played the solo, just this minute, what I did is use that same phrase but do it with a different rhythm. And what it is a melody in the key of E using E chords, believe it or not, and linking them together with the A chord and the B chord to make a complete melodic statement. All right? Now let me show you what's going on here. In the introductory video, when I explained the E chord on the turnaround there, I showed that it was, and still is, an E dominant 7 voicing, right? Listen to the open E and then the 3 notes, right? Definitely sounds like an E chord. There's our open position chord. Now the difference between the two, this chord and this one, is the melody note. It's the same chord, it's got the same notes, but they're arranged in a different order. That's called the voicing. So this is an E chord with a different voicing. Now every chord is made up of, in this case, 4 different notes when we're talking about dominant 7th chords. Those notes are the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And you arrange those notes in different order and you come up with all the voicings that I've been showing you throughout these videos. In this case here, we've got an E chord with the root on top. Here's the 3rd on top. If I keep the same idea going, I can play an E chord with the 5th on top or with the 7th on top. All right, let me show you how to do that. We know this one, this one. Now what's an E chord with the 5th on top? Well, here's the one that all the country blues players use. Right there. Now the root is actually on the 2nd string. That's an E7 chord. Put the open E in the bass, and you can hear it. Right? Now that's actually related to a chord that we learned in the introductory video as well. Remember C7 rather. Right? C7 was played this way. Now there's another way to voice that C7 chord, like this. And what that chord is a different key, but the same voicing as this one up here. It's a great movable chord, and it's one that you hear in a lot of different country blues solos. So there's our E7 chord with the 5th on top, and now we need one with the 7th on top, and that's a familiar chord. We played that down here for the key of A. Slide it up the neck. There's the root, 3rd string, and there's E7 with the 7th on top. Can reach up and get the octave. So now we've got E, E7, 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 and E. Right? So in other words, we've got melodies being played with chords depending on which note we put on top of the voicing. All right? Now this might seem a little complicated, getting a little theoretical, but check it out. This is how it sounds. Now I used the voicings that we just talked about, but I added something, which is little half-step connections. We're used to this one, but I also did this. Right? By taking the same shape and moving it up until you reach the next shape, you can almost play every single note. Some of them are a little touchy, but these work for sure. So you take that E7, up a half step, up another half step, and then just stretch those fingers out, keep the E on that 2nd string. And there's our other E7 chord, right? So this is a technique used by country blues guitar players to solo without losing the feel of the rhythm. And you can even extend that idea to the other chords, the A chord and the B chord. It takes a little thinking and a little practice, but it works. For instance, for A, here's A7. Now here's another version of A. This one has the root on top, and it looks like an E chord, but played up here at the 5th fret. I'm not playing a full bar chord, I'm just playing part of it, because all I want is the melody. And then here's A7. This is the one that looks like the E7 chord here. So I've got the root on top, 3rd on top, and then A7 with the 5th on top, right? There's 4 ways to play the A7 chord, and I can link them together by moving those shapes around in half steps as I did for E, all right? Now, when you put it together, the A and the E, using those techniques, it starts to get pretty bluesy, all right? Check this out. I'm going to show you one more trick, by the way, before we play the whole thing. E7, notice I moved down a half step there. What that is a blues way of playing the A7 quick change, right? A7 in the second bar. That's how blues players do it a lot, all right? Check this out then. Now, what did I do there? I used the E lick. When I went to the A chord, though, instead of staying in the open position, played the A chord and used my little lick, the same one I learned for E, right? And then I went back to the E chord, but I stayed up in this neighborhood. That's connecting the melody. It's what they call voice leading. The voicings connect with one another, right? For B, back to my familiar position. Now I could do the same thing on B that I did on E and A. In other words, find different ways to play the B chord. There's B, turns out there's B with the fifth on top. There's B with the seventh on top, root. There's B with the root on top. B with the third on top, right? So a whole lot of stuff going on with those three chords when you get all those voicings together, all right? Now I'm going to play one more example of a blues using those different chord voicings, and I'll be playing exactly what I just showed you for the E, the A, and the B chord, and just tying them together so you can get an idea how it sounds. 2, 3, 4. Got up there in the stratosphere a little bit, huh? Now we started off with some familiar territory, E, going down that half step. Now I explain that as a quick change. Even though I'm not changing the bass note, it's still implying the A chord. Hey, you know, we're among friends here. So there's your quick change, back to E. Now instead of going down, I went up. Right? Connecting by half steps up to that E chord there. Now, when I go to my A chord, I could go either to this one or I could go to this one. I chose to go to this one. As you learn these shapes and see how the 1 chord, 4 chord, and 5 chord are related, you can start making these choices yourself. So I went up to the A chord, used the same idea, half steps, back to the E chord. Right? Now, here comes the B chord. And this time, rather than jump all the way back down low and play that open B7 as I have in the past, I decided I'm going to take a chance here and play B up in the same neighborhood. And the one that turns out to be right next door, if I go from E to B, is that one right there. This little 3-note shape here. We know this one. Here's the E. Same shape. The B, it's right here. So it's the B7 chord with the third on top. I played that. Back to A. Now on the B chord, there's no bass note that you can really hit. That's okay. Nobody's going to miss it, right? It's so exciting anyway. There's the A. Now I played the same shape that I've been playing on the E, the turnaround lick, but this time played in A, down in half steps. Going to the A major triad, and then Familiar turnaround, B7, back to the root. Now this is a style of playing that isn't new. Using chords, moving around the neck, connecting the chords melodically. It's been around for a long time. And there was a guitar player who did a lot of very influential recordings in the 1920s. His name was Lonnie Johnson. He recorded right up until the 1960s, but the best known stuff was from the 20s, and it was very melodic, moving up and down the neck, and he influenced everybody. Robert Johnson, T-Bone Walker, B.B. King, right on down the line. So if you haven't heard of Lonnie Johnson, you should go check it out, because he's a guy you want to listen to. Now that's a sound that everybody instantly recognizes as blues, and a big reason for that is that I'm playing melodies using the blues scale, and once again in the key of E, taking advantage of those open strings. So I'm going to show you some licks in the blues scale in the key of E. If you want to expand and be able to play all over the neck using different patterns, I suggest you check out some electric guitar videos that concentrate more on those ideas. But in blues, especially acoustic blues, you're going to tend to play most of your stuff right down around the nut. Okay, so that's where we're going to stay. Now, let me show you first of all the scale itself, and then we'll immediately put it to work. The blues scale has, well, has 5 notes in it with an extra note that people use a lot. I'll show you the first 5. It's called a pentatonic scale, E pentatonic. Here's E on the 4th string, open G, 2nd fret, open B, 3rd fret, open E. That's the octave. That's 5 different notes, then you get to the octave. That's number 6. Back down. Now you notice I'm not being too fancy with my fingering. You don't need to be. You don't want to be. You want to get a good grip on it. So my thumb's over the top. Right? Holding it like a baseball bat, the way a guitar should be held as far as I'm concerned. As far as the right hand is concerned, it's alternate picking. Again, in blues, you don't have to get too tricky with the picking. A lot of players will even play mostly downstrokes. That's okay. It's the feel we're after. All right? Now, the extra note that I was talking about is this one. All right? That's called the flat 5. 1, this is the minor 3rd, the 4th, the flatted 5th, or the sharp 4. Call it either one. We'll call it flat 5. And then the 5th. That really sounds bluesy. That's a blue note, right? When they talk about the blues scale, the blues sound, that's a blue note right there. All right? So now you got the E blues scale. One other note that everybody plays up on top is that G. And not only that, you bend it. And you bend that 2nd string too. It's these little subtleties that make it sound like blues. Now here's a phrase using the E blues scale. All I'm doing is playing the notes of the scale and giving it that little shuffle rhythm. Right? Bend that first note a little bit. That's a pull-off. Then you can add in the notes of the chord as we have in the past, right? So you're still getting the sound of the harmony mixed in with the melody, but now there's more melody as we add more notes to the scale. All right. Now I'll show you a couple of common phrases that people use, things that I was doing just a minute ago when I was playing. Right. That's a little trick lick that everybody uses. And that involves actually 2 different moves. One is a hammer-on and then a pull-off and another pull-off before you land on the bottom note. So pick it once, hammer, pull, pull, and then pick the next string. It's what they sometimes call a turn. In other words, it sort of turns the corner and goes back on itself. And it's the kind of thing that you can add to a phrase to make it sound real bluesy. Here's another one. Now this one is a real nice one because it's almost like a chord. You're playing two notes together. 4th fret on the 3rd string, third fret on the 2nd string. And notice how I'm sliding in there like that. Now this is another blues phrase here, where you pick the note and then slide it. And then pull off. So right now in the key of E, we've got some pretty traditional sounding stuff. That last phrase there was a variation. Now you can continue that pattern down into the lower octave, starting with the low E string. Here's the pentatonic scale. 3rd finger, open, 2nd, open, 2nd, back down. Now the flat 5 is played with the 1st finger. Now, because the fingering is different down in there, you don't have the same turns and phrases exactly, but you can kind of improvise around that. Right, there's a version of the turn. In that case, it's open string, hammer, pull, and give that note a little tug as well. Now those phrases down on the low end, those are kind of in the style of a lot of Chicago blues players, Muddy Waters among them. You can get a lot of mileage out of the low strings. If you put the high and the low strings together, you can get sort of what they call a call and response. Play a lick up high, play a lick down low. Right? You get the idea. Now, if you want to use the blues scale and play a 12-bar blues, we're in the key of E, but we have two other chords, the A chord and the B chord. So the question is, do you have to change scales when you change chords? And the answer is no, you don't. The blues scale will fit over all of the chords. When you're playing the chords, of course, and using different voicings like we've been doing, every time the chords change, you have to think of the new chord and find the right shape. But the magic of this style of playing down on the low end is that you can play the new chord and then go back to the old scale. Check it out. All right, blues in E. Now you hear the other chords, the A chord and the B chord, mainly because I'm playing the bass note on the A chord, right? And it helps if you kind of play around the notes of the A chord, but really I'm using the E blues scale as the glue that holds the whole thing together. Now to prove that that scale fits over all three chords, check it out. I'm going to play one lick and I'm going to change the chords underneath the lick, but the lick is all from the E blues scale. Sounds like this. Here's A. B. Show you one more thing here. This is something that is a real down-home lick. It goes like this. We'll take it from the 5 chord. What I did there, I had the 5 chord, I played the A, and then back to the open position. The new sound was this up here. First finger at the 7th fret, second finger at the 8th fret. And bend that second string just a little bit. That's a real down-home sound. You can use that on the E chord. You can use it anywhere in the progression. Then I go right back down low again. There's a famous tune that uses that in the intro. It's called That's All Right, and tune recorded by Muddy Waters guitar player Jimmy Rogers, blues classic. Familiar sound. We've actually played most of the stuff that I just did there, and you've heard it 1,000 times, I'm sure. But the difference is I was keeping time for myself on the bass notes while playing the melody notes. In other words, I was finger picking. Now, this video is not intended to be a method for finger picking, but I'm going to show you enough to get you started in blues. And it's a pretty basic approach, and it concentrates, as everything else we've done, on rhythm. All right? Here's how you do it. I'm using a flat pick, and I talked back at the beginning about the different options for picking, thumb picks, thumb and fingers. You can do finger picking, obviously, with a bare thumb and the finger. I like the flat pick because, first of all, I'm used to it. I use it whenever I play the guitar. And secondly, it gives me a nice, thick sound on the bass, right? Lots of definition. You can really hear the notes. If I play with my thumb like this, it's kind of quiet. Playing with the pick, you really hear the note pop out, right? Now, what I'm playing here is a technique that's called, by some people, hybrid picking. That means combination of the pick and fingers. Now, I'm holding the pick just the way everybody normally holds a pick, right? Thumb and first finger. And I'm using it to play all downstrokes on the low E string. And then, with my bare second and third fingers, I'm playing notes on the higher strings. And there's no law about which finger you use on which string. You just sort of work it out, all right? So here's how you get started. First thing we're going to do is play a shuffle on that low E, like this. Real slow. Okay? Now, use your third finger. I'm holding an E chord, but I'm not actually going to play the notes of the chord. I'm just going to use the high E string and go like this. Got that? Now, the tendency is going to be that you're going to want to stop picking when you pluck that note. But the whole trick is to keep picking even while you're playing the high note. Now on every beat. All right. Now I'm going to play in in sync with the bass note. That's probably the easiest in a way because they're both doing the same thing. Now, here's a trick. I'm playing opposite the bass. Real slow. Now I hit the downbeat, then the middle part of the triplet is with the finger, but the shuffle is still being played with the pick. Now, all the stuff you hear in different blues licks is combinations of being on the beat or off the beat, like this. That's the basic technique, and it really doesn't get any more complicated than that in the right hand. The only difference is that you start moving across the neck and playing different notes in your left hand, and you have to stay coordinated. So for instance, here's a way to get started with your melodies, is take the blues scale and play the blues scale using a steady bass note. The note stays the same, the melody changes, and you notice I'm using second and third fingers, and I'm not being too particular about which one I use, as long as I can just hit the note. All right? Now check this out. I'm using phrases that we learned earlier and adding them together with the finger picking idea to make a complete self-accompanied rhythm pattern. Now let's play some of that Muddy Waters blues. This is a style of playing that Muddy Waters didn't invent, but he certainly popularized. He was recorded back in, I think it was 1942, if I'm not mistaken, by Alan Lomax for the Library of Congress. He was playing in his cabin on Stovall's plantation, and he played a couple of blues songs that he later recorded for Chess Records, and they used this similar style of playing, self-accompanied. He learned it from people like Son House and Robert Johnson himself. It's a long tradition. So we're going to take the ideas that I showed you about one-note bass and then finger-picking the melody, and we're going to apply it to a 12-bar progression. See what it sounds like. Here's a taste of it, and then I'll show you what we're doing. All right? Here we go. Just keep going and going, right? Now, what I did there on the E chord is same thing I showed you, one-note bass playing different phrases. The tricky part here, as I said, is to keep the time steady while playing different rhythms with the left hand, right? So those little turns. Right, now check out the fingering on that. This is very important. Notice where the phrase starts. The turn starts on the beat. And the fast notes, the da-da-da-da, is actually, right on time. You know, it's not just a random set of notes. They da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. There's a definite rhythm to it. So as you learn a new phrase, you want to break it down and know where it fits in the beat. And that means you're going very slowly and working your way up. So, for instance, key of E. Now, in this case, when I went to this phrase, I went ahead and let the bass note go to a triplet as well. So I'm actually playing 3 notes together, all in the same rhythm, bass note and the fingers. Then go back to the shuffle. You don't have to be too religious about the bass figure. It should be steady. It should be a shuffle most of the time. But if you change a beat here or there without changing the rhythm, then you're okay. Because Muddy did it, I do it, everybody does it. It's okay. There'll be none the wiser. Just keep that beat going. All right? So we got our E chord with a couple of licks. Now the A chord. We've already learned that melody. We played it several times in the context of the chord and independently as well. Now we're using the open A string. And you see the only thing that's changed is the placement of the pick on the 5th string instead of the 6th string. And I go back to E. B chord again, I'm using old reliable. I got my B7 shape, and I'm just going to keep hammering that bass note. Nothing fancy about it. Right? And then back to A. Now, the only thing I'm missing to make this a full Muddy Waters blues is the Muddy Waters turnaround. Right? Here's the Muddy Waters turnaround. These 2 notes right here. 2nd finger on the 5th string of the 2nd fret, 1st finger, 3rd string, 1st fret. Move it right up. Now, you can flat pick the first part of it, but then you need to use the pick and fingers to pick the last one. Another variation. It's a nice one. There you're picking the pick on the 5th string, the 2nd finger is plucking the 3rd string, and the 3rd finger is plucking the open E string. Right. Now in context, it'll sound like this. Right? Starts on the 2nd beat, as all these turnarounds do, right? So 5 chord, 4 chord, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And I'm doing an extra little note in the run up to the 5 chord. Start with the F sharp, open, and then play your B7 chord. And with that turnaround, with that run up to the 5 chord, and with all the little finger picking I'm showing you, you get some really authentic, down-home Muddy Waters blues. Now that's a tricky little blues in the key of A that combines some of the stylistic trademarks of Texas blues guitar player Lightnin' Hopkins with a turnaround that was a trademark of Robert Johnson. So we're really going back in blues history with this one. Now, playing in the key of A and playing in the key of E really involve the same identical techniques. We're not getting into sophisticated finger picking at this point. We're just talking about the one note bass and then playing the melody up above. So the only thing that really changes is my left hand. I'm playing different shapes, but my right hand's doing the same technique. So now playing my shuffle pattern on the A, and I'm holding my A7 chord here. This is the one that gives me access to the high note and the blues scale. Now this is the way that a lot of country blues players play this A chord, because using one finger means that you've got the other three fingers free to play melodies. Now, I started off by playing a Lightnin' Hopkins lick. That is a tricky little phrase, and what it involves is a fourth finger bar, and then you play the first finger bar. It's just letting that first finger hang over the first string there. And then a little trill. A trill is a hammer-on pull-off. Just do it as fast as you can. And then back to the second string. And then bar again with that finger down to the root. If that one's too tricky, here's a slightly easier variation that you can use to work up to it. Right, it's a little bit more scale-wise, so you don't have to bar so much with your fourth finger. Right? It has basically the same sound. Right? So there I'm barring, then playing the seventh, then down the scale. When I go to the D chord, this is the variation on the D chord that was talked about in the introductory video. This is a D chord with a third in the bass. In other words, the third degree of the D chord is down here. F sharp, open D, fourth string, A on the third string, another D on the second string, and then with the index finger at the first fret, you can play the seventh, so you can lift up your fourth finger and you get a D7 chord. And once again, just keep that note going while you play your rhythms against it. Back to A. Now E. Here I'm holding the chord down and just adding my other fingers as I have before for embellishments. Walk up to the D with the F sharp in the bass. And now I'm ready for my Robert Johnson turnaround. Now this is I like this turnaround. I use this one a lot. Here, I'll show you the easiest, the most efficient way to finger it. Sometimes when you're in a hurry, you just grab what you can, but this is the best way to do it. Fourth finger on the top, first finger on the fourth string, and you have to finger pick this one. So pick, it's going to be on the fourth string, and the second finger is going to pluck the top note. Move your index finger down like that. Again, it starts on the second beat, so 3, 4, 1. Now we go to the 5 chord, which in the key of A is E. Right, I play my little turn there, not officially the turn, but my embellishment. And back to A. All right. Let's play the whole 12-bar progression using the Lightnin' lick with the D chord, third in the bass, and then the Robert Johnson turnaround. All right, here we go. 2, 3, 4. That ending, by the way, is the Lightning Hopkins ending. Half the time you'd never know he was going to end the song until he played that lick, and then it was all over. So had to be ready to stop on a dime. So now you got blues in A, you got blues in E, you got open position scales. You can play chords up and down the neck. I think you got enough for this one right here. That's enough for me. That's about everything I know. So it's been a pleasure sharing this stuff with you. There is more to do in the field of acoustic blues. You can get more into finger picking. That's the subject of other videos by other people. And it gets very sophisticated. Actual Robert Johnson style finger picking is very sophisticated in the way that he played different tempos while singing, which is no small feat. Playing in different keys. You can use a capo if you need to change keys, of course, which is another thing that Robert Johnson did. So there's a long-standing tradition of finger picking, different styles of melodies, different chord voicings moving up and down. But right now you've got all the basics to keep you busy for quite a while. And this is the essence of acoustic blues playing right here. So hope you've had a good time. I want to take it on out.